Thumbelina by Hans Christian Andersen. There was once a woman who wished to have a child. She went to a fairy and said, "I would really like to have a little child. Can you tell me where I can find one?" "Oh, that can be easily managed," said the fairy. "Here's a barley corn. Put it into a flower pot and see what will happen." "Thank you," said the woman, and she paid the fairy the price of the barley corn. Then she went home and planted it, and soon a flower grew. It looked like a tulip, but with its leaves tightly closed, as if it was still a bud. "It is a beautiful flower," said the woman, and she kissed the red and golden coloured petals. And as she did so, the flower opened. Inside the flower sat a very delicate and graceful little girl. She was smaller than a thumb, and they called her Little Thumb, or Thumbelina, because she was so small. For a cradle, she had a walnut shell. Her bed was made from blue violet leaves, with a rose leaf for a cover. The little girl slept here at night, but during the day she amused herself on a table where the peasant wife had placed a plate full of water. Round this plate were wreaths of flowers with their stems in the water, and upon it floated a large tulip leaf, which the little girl used as a boat. Here she sat and rowed herself from side to side with 2 oars made of white horsehair. It was a very pretty sight. Thumbelina also had the most beautiful voice. She sang so softly and sweetly. One night, while she lay in her pretty bed, a large, ugly, wet toad crept through a broken window and leaped right upon the table where Thumbelina lay sleeping under her rose-leaf quilt. "What a pretty little wife this would make for my son," said the toad, and she took up the walnut shell in which Thumbelina lay asleep and jumped through the window with it into the garden. The toad's son was even uglier than his mother, and when he saw the pretty little girl in her elegant bed, he could only cry, "Croak, croak, croak." "Don't speak so loud or she'll wake," said the mother toad, "and then she might run away. We'll put her on one of the lily pads out in the stream. It will be like an island to her, seeing as she is so light and small. She'll be unable to escape." Far out in the stream grew a number of water lilies with broad green leaves which seemed to float on the top of the water. The old toad swam out to the furthest one and took with her the walnut shell in which Thumbelina still lay asleep. The tiny creature woke very early in the morning and began to cry bitterly when she found where she was. All she could see was water surrounding her, and she had no way to reach land. Meanwhile, the old toad was very busy under the marsh, preparing a new home for her son and Thumbelina. Then she swam out with her ugly son to the leaf on which she had placed poor Thumbelina. The old toad bowed low to Thumbelina in the water and said, "Here's my son. He will be your husband, and you will live happily together in the marsh by the stream." "Croak, croak, croak," was all her son could say for himself. Then they left Thumbelina all alone on the green leaf, where she sat and cried. She did not want to live with the old toad and have her ugly son for a husband. The little fishes who swam about in the water beneath had seen the toad and heard what she said. So now they lifted their heads above the water to look at the little girl. As soon as they caught sight of her, they saw that she was very pretty, and they couldn't bear to think that she must go and live with the ugly toads. No, it must never be. So they gathered together in the water around Thumbelina's lily pad and cut the root loose with their teeth. Then the leaf floated down the stream, carrying Thumbelina far away out of reach of land. Thumbelina sailed past many towns, and the little birds in the bushes saw her and sang, "What a lovely creature!" So the leaf swam away with her farther and farther until it brought her to other lands. A graceful little white butterfly constantly fluttered round her and at last landed on the leaf. Thumbelina took the ribbon from her dress and tied one end of it around the butterfly, and she fastened the other end to the leaf, which now glided on much faster than before, taking Thumbelina with it as she stood. Soon a large flying beetle flew by. The moment he caught sight of Thumbelina, he caught her round her waist with his claws and flew with her into a tree. The lily pad carried on floating away on the brook, and the butterfly flew away with it, for he was fastened to it and could not get away. Thumbelina was terrified, but she was also sorry for the beautiful white butterfly which she had fastened to the leaf, for if he could not free himself, then he would surely die of hunger. The beetle sat beside her on a large green leaf, gave her some honey from the flowers to eat, and told her that she was very pretty, though not in the least like a flying beetle. After a time, all the flying beetles who lived in the tree came to see Thumbelina. They stared at her, and then the young lady beetles turned up their feelers and said, "She has only 2 legs. How ugly that looks." "She has no feelers," said another. "Her waist is quite slim. Pooh, she's like a human being." "Oh, she is ugly," said all the lady beetles. The flying beetle who had run away with her believed all the others when they said that she was ugly. He wanted nothing more to do with her and told her to leave. Then he flew down with her from the tree and placed her on a daisy. And Thumbelina cried to think that she was so ugly that even the beetles didn't want to know her. And all the while she was really the loveliest creature that anybody could imagine. During the whole summer, poor little Thumbelina lived alone in the wide forest. She made herself a bed with blades of grass and hung it up under a broad leaf to protect herself from the rain. She sucked the honey from the flowers for food and drank the dew from their leaves every morning. Summer and autumn both passed, and then came the winter, the long, cold winter. All the birds who had sung to her so sweetly had flown away, and the trees and the flowers had withered. The large shamrock, under the shelter of which she had lived, was now rolled together and shriveled up. Nothing remained but a yellow, withered stalk. Thumbelina felt dreadfully cold, for her clothes were torn, and she was so frail and delicate that she was nearly frozen to death. It began to snow too, and the snowflakes, as they fell upon her, were like a whole shovelful falling upon one of us, for we are tall, but she was only an inch high. She wrapped herself in a dry leaf, but it cracked in the middle and could not keep her warm, and so she shivered with the cold. Near the wood in which she had been living was a large cornfield, but the corn had been cut a long time. Nothing remained but the bare, dry stubble standing up out of the frozen ground. For a tiny girl like Thumbelina, it was like struggling through a large wood. She shivered with the cold. At last she came to the door of a field mouse who had a little den under the corn stubble. The field mouse's home was warm and comfortable, with a whole room full of corn, a kitchen, and a beautiful dining room. Poor Thumbelina stood before the door and asked for a small piece of barley corn, for she hadn't had anything to eat for 2 days. "You poor little creature," said the field mouse, "come into my warm room and dine with me." She was pleased with Thumbelina, so she said, "You're quite welcome to stay with me all the winter, if you like, but you must keep my rooms clean and neat, and tell me stories, for I would love to hear them." So Thumbelina did all that the field mouse asked her, and found herself very comfortable. "We shall have a visitor soon," said the field mouse one day. "My neighbour pays me a visit once a week. He's better off than I am. He has large rooms, and he wears a beautiful black velvet coat. If you could only have him for a husband, you would be well provided for indeed. But he's blind, so you must tell him some of your prettiest stories." Thumbelina did not feel at all interested about this neighbour, for he was a mole. However, he came and paid his visit, dressed in his black velvet coat. "He's very rich and smart, and his house is 20 times larger than mine," said the field mouse. Thumbelina was obliged to sing to the mole, "Ladybird, ladybird, fly away home," and many other pretty songs. And the mole fell in love with her because she had such a sweet voice. A short time before, the mole had dug a long passage under the earth, which led from the field mouse's home all the way to his own. And the field mouse and Thumbelina had permission to walk here whenever they liked. But he warned them not to be alarmed at the sight of a dead bird which lay in the passage. It was a perfect bird, with a beak and feathers, and could not have been dead for long. It was lying just where the mole had made his passage. In his mouth, the mole held a piece of wood which glowed in the dark. Then he went before Thumbelina and the field mouse to light the way through the long dark passage. When they came to the spot where the dead bird lay, the mole pushed his broad nose through the ceiling, so that the earth gave way and the daylight shone into the passage. In the middle of the floor lay a swallow, his beautiful wings pulled close to his sides, his feet and head drawn up under his feathers. The poor bird had evidently died of the cold. It made little Thumbelina very sad to see it, for she loved the little birds. All the summer they had sung and twittered for her so beautifully. But the mole pushed it aside with his crooked legs and said, "He will sing no more now. How miserable it must be to be born a little bird. I am thankful that none of my children will ever be birds, for they can do nothing but cry tweet tweet, and must always die of hunger in the winter." "Yes, you may well say that, as a clever man," exclaimed the field mouse. "What is the use of a bird's twittering if, when winter comes, he must either starve or be frozen to death?" Thumbelina said nothing, but when the two others had turned away, she stooped down and stroked the bird's head and kissed the closed eyelids. "Maybe this was the bird who sang to me so sweetly in the summer," she said, "and how much pleasure it gave me, you dear pretty bird." The mole now covered the hole through which the daylight shone, and then he accompanied Thumbelina and the little field mouse home. But during the night, Thumbelina could not sleep, so she got out of bed and wove a large, beautiful carpet of hay. she carried it to the dead bird and spread it over him, with some down from the flowers which she had found in the field mouse's room. It was as soft as wool, and she spread some of it on each side of the bird so that he could lie warmly in the cold earth. "Goodbye, pretty little bird," she said. "Goodbye. Thank you for your beautiful singing during the summer, when all the trees were green and the warm sun shone upon us." Then she rested her head on the bird, but she was shocked, for it seemed as if something inside the bird went thump, thump. It was the bird's heart. He was not really dead, only numb with the cold, and the warmth had brought him to life. Thumbelina trembled. She was very frightened. The bird was big, a great deal bigger than herself. But she found her courage, laid the wool more thickly over the poor swallow, and then took a leaf and laid it over his head. The next night she came to see the bird again. He was alive, but very weak. He could only open his eyes for a moment to look at Thumbelina. "Thank you, little girl," said the sick swallow. "You have kept me so warm that I shall soon be strong again and able to fly about in the warm sunshine." "Oh," said Thumbelina, "it's cold outside now. It snows and freezes. Stay in your warm bed and I will take care of you." She brought the swallow some water in a flower leaf, and after he had drunk, he told her that he had hurt one of his wings in a thorn bush and could not fly as fast as the others, who were soon far away on their journey to warm countries. At last he had fallen to the earth and could remember nothing more, nor how he came to be where Thumbelina had found him. All winter the swallow remained underground, and Thumbelina took care of him. She did not tell either the mole or the field mouse anything about it. Very soon the springtime came, and the sun warmed the earth. Then the swallow said goodbye to Thumbelina, and she opened the hole in the ceiling which the mole had made. The sun shone in upon them so beautifully that the swallow asked her if she would like to go with him. She could sit on his back, he said, and he would fly away with her into the green woods. But she knew the field mouse would be sad if she left her like that, so Thumbelina said, "No, I cannot." "Goodbye then, goodbye, kind little girl," said the swallow, and he flew out into the sunshine. Thumbelina looked after him, and the tears rose in her eyes. She was very fond of the poor swallow. "Tweet, tweet," sang the bird as he flew out into the green woods, and Thumbelina felt very sad. She was not allowed to go out into the warm sunshine. "You are going to be married, little one," said the field mouse. "My neighbour has asked for you. What a piece of luck for a poor child like you. Now we will prepare your wedding clothes." Thumbelina had to turn the spindle, and the field mouse hired 4 spiders who were to weave day and night. Every evening the mole visited her and was continually speaking of the time when the summer would be over. Then he would marry Thumbelina, but right now the sun was so hot that it burned the earth and made it hard like stone. As soon as the summer was over, the wedding should take place. But Thumbelina was not at all pleased, for she did not want to marry the mole. Every morning when the sun rose, and every evening when it went down, Thumbelina would creep out at the door. She thought how beautiful and bright it seemed out there, and wished so much to see her dear friend, the swallow, again. But he never returned, for by this time he had flown far away into the lovely green forest. When autumn arrived, Thumbelina had her wedding clothes quite ready, and the field mouse said to her, "In 4 weeks the wedding must take place." Then Thumbelina said that she would not marry the disagreeable mole. "Nonsense," replied the field mouse. "Now don't be silly, or I shall bite you with my white teeth. He's a very handsome mole with a good fortune. You should be very thankful for such good luck." So the wedding day was fixed, on which the mole was to take her away to live with him, deep under the earth, and never to see the warm sun again, because he did not like it. Thumbelina was very unhappy at the thought of saying goodbye to the beautiful sun. And as the field mouse had given her permission to stand at the door, she went to look at it once more. "Goodbye, bright sun," she cried, stretching out her arms towards it. "Goodbye, goodbye. Greet the little swallow from me, if you should see him again." "Tweet, tweet," sounded over her head suddenly. She looked up, and there was the swallow himself flying close by. As soon as he spied Thumbelina, he was delighted. She told him how she desperately did not want to marry the ugly mole and to live forever beneath the earth, never more to see the bright sun. And as she told him, she cried. "Cold winter is coming," said the swallow, "and I am going to fly away into warmer countries. Will you go with me? You can sit on my back and fasten yourself on with your ribbon. Then we can fly away from the ugly mole and his gloomy rooms, far away, over the mountains into warmer countries, where the sun shines more brightly than here, and where it is always summer. Fly now with me, little one. You saved my life when I lay frozen in that dark, dreary passage." "Yes, I will go with you," said Thumbelina, and she seated herself on the bird's back with her feet on his outstretched wings, and she tied her ribbon to one of his strongest feathers. The swallow rose in the air and flew over forest and over sea, high above the highest mountains covered with snow. Thumbelina would have been frozen in the cold air, but she crept under the bird's warm feathers. Finally, they reached the warm countries, where the sun shines brightly and the sky seems so much higher above the earth. Here on the hedges grew purple, green and white grapes, and lemons and oranges hung from trees in the fields. Beautiful children ran along the country lanes, playing with large butterflies, and as the swallow flew farther and farther, every place appeared even more lovely than the last. At last they came to a blue lake, and by the side of it stood a palace of dazzling white marble, built in the olden times. Vines clustered around its lofty pillars, and at the top were many swallows' nests, and one of these was the home of the swallow who had carried Thumbelina. "This is my house," said the swallow, "but it would not do for you to live there. You would not be comfortable. You must choose for yourself one of those lovely flowers, and I will put you down upon it, and then you shall have everything that you can wish to make you happy." "Oh, that will be wonderful," said Thumbelina, and clapped her little hands with joy. A large marble pillar lay on the ground, which had broken into 3 pieces when it fell. Between these pieces grew the most beautiful large white flowers. So the swallow flew down with Thumbelina and placed her on one of the leaves. But she was so surprised to see a tiny little man in the middle of the flower. He had a gold crown on his head and delicate wings at his shoulders, and was not much larger than she was. He was the angel of the flower. For a tiny man and a tiny woman lived in every flower, and this was the king of them all. "Oh, how beautiful he is," whispered Thumbelina to the swallow. At first, the little prince was frightened of the bird, who was like a giant compared to himself. But when he saw Thumbelina, he was delighted and thought that she was the prettiest little girl he had ever seen. He took the gold crown from his head and placed it on hers, and asked if she would be his wife and queen over all the flowers. This certainly was a very different sort of husband from the son of the toad or the mole with his black velvet fur. So Thumbelina said yes to the handsome prince. Then all the flowers opened, and out of each came a little lady or a tiny lord. Each of them brought Thumbelina a present, but the best gift was a pair of beautiful wings, and they fastened them to Thumbelina's shoulders so that she might fly from flower to flower. Then there was much celebration, and the little swallow who sat above them in his nest was asked to sing a wedding song, which he did as well as he could. But in his heart he felt sad, for he was very fond of Thumbelina and would have liked never to part from her again. "You must not be called Thumbelina any more," said the spirit of the flowers to her. "It's an ugly name, and you are so very lovely. We will call you Maya." And so Maya lived happily ever after amongst her new friends of the flowers.